The Seraph Dominion had never known fear. For 10,000 years, they had carved their empire across the spiral arms of the galaxy. They were predators among the stars, sleek and merciless, their armored fleets gliding through void and flame alike. Their history was written in the ashes of worlds that once dared to resist them. When their war banners unfurled, civilizations collapsed. When their legions marched, entire species bent knee. Fear was not a weapon to them, it was a forgotten weakness. The Seraph had stared into black holes, harnessed the energy of dying stars, and walked on planets where gravity crushed lesser beings into dust. They laughed at plagues, weathered supernovae, and claimed no emotion could shake them. To the Seraph mind, fear was a relic of evolution, and animal instinct burned away in their long ascension to galactic dominance. Until they met humans. It began with whispers in the outer colonies. A species too young for starflight had been sighted in an obscure sector near a yellow star. At first, the Seraph dismissed the reports. Countless primitive races had burned bright before, only to vanish under the Dominion's heel. But when the humans emerged from their homeworld, they carried with them not submission, but audacity. They were fragile things, thin skin stretched over soft bones, their bodies ill-suited for the endless void. Their weapons were crude, their ships brittle shells compared to Seraph cruisers. And yet, when challenged, they did not cower. The Seraph attacked the first human colony as a demonstration, intending to scatter the newcomers like all the others before them. Their warship descended upon a settlement of iron towers and glass streets, expecting panic, expecting surrender. Instead, they found the humans waiting. The colonists did not flee, they armed themselves with whatever they had: outdated rifles, mining lasers, improvised bombs. Against the might of the Dominion, they had no chance. And still, they fought. The Seraph captain laughed at their resistance, but when his ship departed, something unsettled gnawed at him. The humans had not begged for mercy. They had not cried out in despair. They had fought until the very last building fell. Their corpses lay with weapons still clutched in hand, their eyes defiant even in death. This was not submission. This was not the natural order. The Seraph pressed further, striking other colonies, other human worlds. Each time, they expected resistance to weaken. Each time, they expected the will of this fledgling species to shatter. But with every battle, the opposite happened. Humans adapted. They learned. A failed tactic on one world became a deadly ambush on another. Their weapons grew sharper, their fleets larger. What began as desperation hardened into a war machine. The Seraph soon discovered the true nature of humanity's weapon. It was not their guns. Not their ships. Not their technology. It was their will. The Seraph had faced countless species before, creatures who valued survival, who fled when outmatched, who surrendered when faced with annihilation. But humanity did not bend. Where another race would submit, humans grew stubborn. Where others saw despair, humans carved hope from ruins. They fought wars in ways the Seraph had never seen, turning dying planets into traps, detonating their own cities to cripple advancing armies, sacrificing entire fleets to drag Seraph warships into the fires of stars. They fought not because they believed they could win, but because they refused to lose. For the first time in memory, the Dominion's admirals began to hesitate. Reports from the front grew darker, colder. The humans do not fear death, one commander wrote. They wield it as a weapon. Another recorded, they laugh as their ships burn. They scream at us not in agony, but in defiance. At first, the Seraph dismissed it as exaggeration. But soon, entire fleets vanished in human ambushes. Worlds thought conquered were retaken. And worst of all, the Dominion began to hear whispers among their own people, rumors of an enemy who fought like demons, who rose from ashes stronger than before. The Seraph had never believed in legends. Now they were making one. The turning point came at Charon's Rift. The Seraph had cornered a human fleet, barely a dozen ships against nearly 100 Dominion warcruisers. The outcome was certain. Yet the humans did not retreat. Instead, they launched their ships straight into the Seraph formation, detonating reactor cores and suicidal charges, dragging the Dominion's armada into the gravitational jaws of the rift. The Seraph commander survived, but half his fleet was gone. The humans had turned death into victory. The Dominion Council gathered in their obsidian halls, for the first time uncertain. "They are reckless animals," one lord hissed. "They cannot outlast us." Yet others fell silent, haunted by the thought that the humans' weakness was their strength. They did not fear loss, because loss was the story of their species. They did not fear destruction, because destruction was where they thrived. The Seraph had thought themselves immune to fear. But when they closed their eyes, they saw human faces staring back, bloody, broken, smiling in defiance. And somewhere, deep within the Dominion's heart, a seed of fear began to grow. It spread slowly, silently. Soldiers hesitated before battles. Admirals dreaded human ambushes. Civilians whispered in the markets of an enemy that could not be broken. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Seraph trembled, not because their empire might fall, but because they had discovered an enemy who taught them what fear truly was. And so the war burned on. Not for territory. Not for resources. But because one truth had been carved into the stars. Nothing in the universe had ever made the Seraph afraid until they met humans. And once fear had been born, it could never die. The Galactic Union had long forgotten what fear meant. It was the greatest coalition of species ever assembled, hundreds of races bound together by treaties, fleets, and an unshakable belief in their superiority. They ruled the spiral arms with order and stability, stamping out chaos wherever it tried to take root. The Union had survived predators that fed on stars, storms that devoured systems, rebellions that burned across sectors. Nothing had endured against its will. Nothing had lasted long enough to become a threat. Fear, to them, was a myth, a primitive instinct of lesser creatures. And then came humanity. At first, the Union thought nothing of them. Reports trickled in from scouts charting the Perseus Fringe, a young species on a blue planet, just taking its first steps into interstellar space. Their technology was crude, their fleets laughably small, their history riddled with blood and war. To the Union's council, they were another minor species, destined either for absorption or irrelevance. But humanity had one trait the Union overlooked. They did not accept their place. The first clash came when a Union enforcement fleet demanded humanity's submission, standard protocol for newcomers. The humans refused. The admiral in charge, certain of a swift surrender, ordered an attack on a small human colony. The battle lasted longer than expected, but eventually, the colony was crushed. The Union thought the matter resolved. It was not. Instead of folding, humanity's resistance hardened. A dozen colonies rose in revolt, striking back with weapons centuries behind Union standards. By all logic, the humans should have broken under the weight of the Union's fleets. And yet, they won battles. Not many, not decisively, but enough to shake the Union's confidence. For where most species crumbled after a single defeat, the humans adapted. They learned faster than any species the Union had ever faced. Every failure became a lesson. Every loss became a new tactic. Where Union admirals relied on tradition and protocol, humans relied on desperation, and desperation made them unpredictable. A defeated human fleet would not retreat into silence. It would scatter, regroup, and return stronger. A lost planet did not mean submission, it meant guerrilla war, sabotage, and endless resistance. The Union soon realized the humans fought with something more dangerous than firepower. They fought with resolve. There was a story told of a battle on the icy world of Thalvos. A Union army besieged a human city, expecting the defenders to surrender once their supplies ran out. But instead of yielding, the humans set their own city ablaze, denying the Union its victory. As the Union soldiers watched, the humans emerged from the flames, not in retreat, but in counterattack, wielding fire and ash as weapons. They did not fear destruction, because they had turned destruction into their shield. The Union's commanders reported strange patterns. The humans fight as though death itself is nothing, one wrote. They weaponize despair. Their greatest strength is that they do not accept defeat, even when it is inevitable. The Union dismissed it as exaggeration. Until more battles proved otherwise.
Captured Union warships were not scrapped, they were repurposed, refitted with human ingenuity. Where one fleet was lost, another rose, stronger and stranger than before. The humans began to twist Union technology in ways its creators had never imagined, turning weakness into innovation. It was as though every strike against them only fanned a hidden flame. And so the ember grew. The Union's council debated endlessly. Some argued for extermination. Others argued for diplomacy. But fear had begun to creep into their halls, fear of an enemy that refused to vanish, fear of an ember that would ignite the galaxy. The turning point came at the siege of Kilora Prime. The Union deployed its most advanced fleet, determined to crush humanity once and for all. Dozens of capital ships descended on the planet, confident in swift victory. But the humans did not retreat. They turned Kilora into a fortress, lacing its orbit with mines, its cities with traps, its skies with fire. The battle raged for weeks, and though the humans ultimately fell, they took half the Union's fleet with them. The shock was not that the humans lost. The shock was that they had fought so fiercely, with such fury, that victory felt hollow. The Union had bled for a world it should have taken in hours. And everywhere across the stars, whispers spread. The humans are different. They fight like no other. They cannot be broken. The ember had caught, and now it spread like wildfire. Soon, other species watched with unease. Some saw the humans as a threat. Others saw them as hope, a reminder that the Union could bleed, that resistance was possible. Rebellions flared where none had dared before, fueled by the legend of a fragile species who defied the greatest power in the galaxy. The Union had sought to make an example of humanity. Instead, they had lit a torch in the darkness. The war was no longer about one species. It had become something larger. Humanity was no longer merely fighting for survival, they had become the spark for a galaxy that remembered what it meant to resist. And so the Union, once invincible, now faced an enemy they could not comprehend. They had thought fear was extinct. They had thought themselves eternal. But humanity had reminded them of an old truth. All it takes to burn an empire is a single ember. And humanity was not an ember that would go out. The Valar Dominion was older than memory. Their fleets had burned across the stars long before the Galactic Union even formed. Their ancestors had risen from a world of crushing gravity and endless storms, their bodies honed in an environment where weakness meant death. From those brutal beginnings, the Valar had forged an empire that spanned thousands of systems. They claimed entire sectors as their hunting grounds. Fear was not in their blood. The Dominion taught that fear had been extinguished long ago, culled from their lineage in the fires of evolution. They had erased entire civilizations with a thought. They had stood on planets where radiation baked the land into glass, and they had survived. Their armies were relentless, their admirals calculating, their citizens unshakable. In the archives of the Dominion, fear was a concept studied as a curiosity, something primitive species clung to, something the Valar had outgrown. Until the humans arrived. At first, they were a curiosity, nothing more. A young species scratching at the stars, still bound by emotions, still chained by mortality. The Valar expected to add them to the long list of conquered worlds, another people broken and reshaped under Dominion law. Their first contact was dismissive. A fleet descended on a human colony, demanding surrender. The Valar commander expected the usual response: panic, retreat, perhaps a desperate plea for mercy. Instead, the humans opened fire. Their weapons were outdated, their ships brittle shells of steel and flame, but they did not hesitate. They fought until their last engine went dark, until the last hull ruptured. The commander reported the battle as a trivial victory. Yet he noted, almost as an afterthought, the humans did not plead. They died, smiling. The Dominion Council laughed at the report. Smiling? At death? Nonsense. Perhaps the commander mistook a grimace. The incident was dismissed. But soon, it happened again. And again. Everywhere the Dominion advanced, humans resisted with a ferocity that defied reason. When their fleets were shattered, survivors rammed their crippled ships into Valar cruisers. When their cities fell, they detonated their own reactors to drag their conquerors into the grave with them. They were not fighting for survival alone. They were fighting with something deeper. The Veiler began to notice their soldiers hesitating. Veterans who had burned worlds without blinking now spoke in hushed tones about the humans. They said the humans did not fear death. That they welcomed it if it meant victory. That when a human looked at you, even broken and bleeding, you felt their gaze like a weight, as if they knew something you did not. The Dominion tried to stamp out the rumor. But fear has a way of spreading. The turning point came at the Battle of Draxus Reach. The Veiler deployed a full battle group against a handful of human warships. By all logic, it should have been a slaughter. But the humans fought with madness in their eyes. They charged into the Dominion lines, overloading their reactors, tearing holes in the fleet. They lost every ship they had, but they dragged half the Veiler formation into the void with them. The survivors whispered of humans who laughed as their ships burned. Of human captains who broadcast their final words not in despair, but in triumph, "You may kill us, but you will never defeat us." For the first time in millennia, the Veiler Dominion knew hesitation. Their council convened in the obsidian chambers of Veiler Prime. Admirals, generals, and governors gathered, their voices low and uncertain. "They are reckless beasts," one said. "They waste their lives like children with fire." But another replied, "And yet, we bleed because of them. They wound us not with their weapons, but with their refusal to die quietly. They are unlike any foe we have faced." And in the silence that followed, an unspoken truth settled over them. The humans were teaching the Dominion what fear felt like. Fear had a shape now. It had a voice, a face, a name: humanity. The Dominion tried harder. They sent larger fleets, burned more colonies, tightened their grip. But with every victory came greater unease. The humans would not stop. They adapted, they learned, they grew sharper with each defeat. Where other species surrendered to despair, humans drew strength from it. And worse, their defiance spread. Other species watched and whispered, "If humans can resist the Dominion, why can't we?" Rebellions sparked in distant systems. Formerly loyal subjects began to question Dominion rule. The humans had not just survived, they had become a symbol, a living reminder that even the mightiest empire could be defied. The Dominion's grip trembled. Soldiers began to dream of human faces, faces that stared back at them across burning battlefields, unbroken even in death. Admirals woke from nightmares of human fleets rising endlessly from the ashes. Civilians whispered in the markets, wondering if the humans were demons in flesh, born not to live but to haunt. The Veiler Dominion, who had once claimed to have conquered fear, now felt it pressing in on them from every shadow. Because the truth was undeniable. Humans had not erased fear. They had not tamed it. They had taken it, lived with it, and turned it into their strength. And for the first time in uncounted ages, the Veiler Dominion trembled before an enemy. They had thought themselves immortal. They had thought themselves untouchable. But now they realized the terrible truth: immortality breeds arrogance, and arrogance blinds you. Humanity had walked into the galaxy carrying nothing but their fragile bodies, their stubborn will, and their ancient companion, fear. Fear, the Dominion had forgotten. Fear, the humans had mastered. And now the stars themselves would remember what it meant when fear took shape.